It's the SDG Podcast. We're here at the Podcasters. Say hello, podcasters, and introduce yourselves.
Hi, I'm Peter Lawrence.
I'm Bryan Wolf.
Chad Lavigne. Whoop. See, that's what we get when we just go off script.
That's my fault. I should have gave you a batting order.
Give us a batting order.
Chad Lavigne, one of our Java developers, a special guest today. Welcome. And Bryan Wolf, you're a Java developer too, right?
Microsoft.
I knew it.
That's what I was thinking.
I didn't read your bio. Awesome. So today we're going to talk about cloud architecture and selecting the right fit for your organization. We've got Microsoft, Azure, we've got Amazon, AWS, and Google Cloud. Those are the big three. Are there other cloud providers?
Yes.
Okay. I don't know what they are. So
Oracle Sales Cloud is another one that's sort of out in the space, but a little bit more specialized, not down in the system level, but more in the, Oracle.
Yeah. I'm guessing IBM has a cloud probably.
IBM has a cloud too. Yep.
A lot of clouds in the sky. Chad, why don't you give me a kind of a high level view of Amazon AWS?
It's a lot of things, right? I mean, if you go to AWS and look at the admin console and try to pick a service from their drop-down list, it's enormous and overwhelming, right? But if you're just asking what do people use it for, it's basically to run applications on Amazon's hardware, right? It was born out of, they had a bunch of hardware that they had to buy because of holiday spike, right? And they found a way to repurpose that by selling compute time to people on their hardware when that stuff wasn't in use. It's good for things like you can ramp up and ramp down your hardware based on usage because you just pay for what you use. That's kind of one of the big advantages, I guess. And they provide everything, right? Like, so there's compute solutions, container solutions, data store solutions, whether it's, relational or document store and caching and just everything under the sun. So
you really almost have to kind of start with what you want to do and then back into it because it's going to have pretty much everything. So could you just quickly list all the services off the top of your head? So Azure is just Microsoft's version of the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, top. I think the biggest difference between, obviously it has the menu of infinite numbers of options like AWS, though not. I think AWS probably has the lead on that by a good sight, but probably it's more the blended ecosystem. Everything from Azure can hit GitHub, it can hit Azure DevOps, you can publish back and forth, you can maintain and manage the whole ecosystem without leaving your Microsoft sign-in. So that's a big reason why it becomes more popular, why you might go that direction. The other kind of interesting thing for a lot of organizations is it supports Windows. At the end of the day, there's a lot of stuff that's still running on Windows boxes and you can put it in the cloud and you can run even serverless on a Windows environment, which sometimes can be the make or break. So I think those are probably the two major things that I'd look at. There's a bunch of other little things, but Microsoft having GitHub under their umbrella, it's only going to get more integrated as time goes on.
So Chad, what kind of architectures and solutions have you done on AWS?
Sure, that's a good question. It depends on the problem the customer's trying to solve. Usually that's how we kind of decide. It kind of starts with a discovery phase usually where they explain the problem space and then we kind of pick the solution based on the problem. So did one recently, and usually it's many services to kind of make up the whole solution. But we do a lot of containerized stuff. So in AWS, that means their ECS service or Fargate, which is like their serverless container offering, which is a bunch of confusing words that basically mean Docker in AWS. And so we'll run services on those containers, sometimes like microservice architecture, and then there's some sort of data store behind there. Usually, a lot of times relational, sometimes not. Just did one that was Neo4j actually on AWS, and then there's a lot of other services involved to kind of bring it all together into one solution, right? So there's all like the VPC services, that's their virtual private cloud, which is essentially networking, where you're setting up all your networking and firewall rules and things like that. And, you know, there's usually some sort of authentication authorization solution. Cognito is the one AWS uses a lot. Yeah, just a whole bunch of stuff. I mean, I could go on, but it really depends on the problem they're trying to solve. You know, we hear a lot about serverless right now. So Lambda is kind of the serverless function solution in AWS. That's really good for some of these intermittent things that you need to do, like a batch job or something like that, because it just calls the function when it needs to. And there's no servers to manage. And there's other services that are considered serverless, which really all it means is you don't have to manage the infrastructure. AWS does that for you. So they kind of provision the stuff for you. And all of the cloud providers have that, whether it's GCP or Azure or whatever. They have their various serverless offerings. Actually, just recently for my customer, we did a big evaluation of the 3 cloud providers, and they're only getting more similar. That, you know, it's pretty similar, the offering across all of them. Like Bryan said, you know, I think AWS maybe has the edge in a few spots that, you know, especially the areas I was responsible for evaluating. You know, you'd see sometimes where AWS has maybe 2 things that where Azure has 1, but it's not many. And they're getting closer all the time. I really think the choice on which one you choose is more about what do your resources know and what are they comfortable with is probably the most important, in my opinion. But does that kind of answer your question? I went on and on, but
no, I think that's great. You certainly don't want somebody starting from scratch, you know, and spinning up necessarily if they've got, you know, 10 years of experience in one platform. Don't go switching to something that they don't know, right? You're basically throwing that experience away for not much benefit, right?
Sure. Yeah. Well, and you asked how do you know, what kind of solutions do we make? A lot of the kind of core services that you're going to choose are going to depend on, are you doing something net new, which we could do kind of cloud native, which is, you know, it was built to be in the cloud, or do we have to do like a lift and shift where there's on-prem stuff that we're going to move? Then maybe you're doing more of a VMs in the cloud kind of a solution, or like my current customer, they have some stuff that has to stay on-prem, so we have hybrid cloud where, you know, there's mainframe stuff that they're not going to be able to move away from real soon. So
there's no cloud mainframes yet, are there?
Probably IBM will do it for you.
I'm sure they probably spin up a Z machine for you somewhere.
They got your back.
My experience with Azure, you know, is like I'm doing more and more with it. You know, one of the most recent things is using the Logic apps. Mm-hmm. So it's sort of a low code way of doing applications. It's just like Microsoft Flow, which was part of, I guess, what's now called Microsoft 365, used to be Office 365. So we're actually using that. We call that from Nintex, which is a cloud workflow solution that used to be tethered to SharePoint. Now it's its own thing. Mm-hmm. Nintex Workflow Cloud. We actually call an Azure Logic app so that it can send a document to our recruiting system. And like the application, we store it there. So we're kind of integrating all those things, and it's really cool to be able to do that. And that stuff's kind of on demand. So it's like the serverless solutions where you're not paying for that idle time, where it's just running.
Yeah, for sure.
So Bryan, what kind of stuff have you been using Azure for lately?
Well, I think that's a great launching point. I mean, the Microsoft Grid, if you will, their whole backend that they've built around their Office and Teams, especially, like, I think that's an area where people are just starting to realize how cool you can really get with some of this stuff. Bots, for example, Slack has a fantastic bot ecosystem. I think the Teams bot ecosystem has the opportunity to meet and exceed that in the coming probably year or two, to the point that you can get some pretty immersive and interactive experiences related to like just stuff I can do from my chat app, which can be really handy. Like you want to find quick opportunity. Let me go out and quickly figure out. I want a meeting tomorrow at the earliest possible time. Cool. There's already bots you can go out there and get. That'll be like, who are the people you want, and when can they be there? I've kind of been dabbling in some of that stuff. Interestingly, a lot of the Azure apps seem to really kind of gravitate around a few solutions, which I find most often is either the Azure Service Bus or Azure Event Hubs, which is kind of the eventing backbone to the entire Azure ecosystem. Azure provides Kafka pretty much as a serverless component, kind of a platform as a service, if you will, through the Azure Event Hub, which is really powerful, I think, for a lot of people who are trying to get into that more real-time kind of approach to getting data out of their system without having to have 8 people to administer a Kafka server and scalability, because obviously we're not running 24/7, 365 at the same volume. Most of the time it's like, oh, we have our big burst of activity on a certain day, or we're really kind of a quarterly company, so Q4 is like our entire business. We got to nail it. I don't care what the dials are, turn them all up to 11.
That's right.
And then during Q1 is kind of our management phase, where we're like, well, can we get through this, couple of weeks? I know it's a little tight, but we don't, we want to save all of our budget, our Azure budget for Q4. The other thing you see a lot is just the app services provide a really good basis for a lot of the serverless components. For example, if you're trying to build maybe just a little bit more predictability in the pricing or the costs, you can actually back up your serverless stuff, such as functions and so on and so forth. And it's really cool to keep adding more stuff to that ecosystem with a set of kind of bespoke hardware. So that's yours. And in some cases, you can even scale above that. So that can be like, this is my little playground to start with. And then when things get a little bit overloaded, or we do a new release, and so everybody's hitting our website, we have that opportunity to scale up, but you have that baseline that you can always lean on. So that tends to be kind of the direction things go in. I think there's a lot of really neat stuff they're doing related to people getting into that blended approach, the kind of hybrid cloud. The Azure Arc is pretty new, but I think it offers an opportunity for IT groups such as, you, who can really see the ecosystem and understand what's local, what's in the cloud. And even some of the cool things is you can shift things to being local, or from being local to in the cloud based on need. So, nobody ever wants to do the VM host going down, but it does happen. And when it does, you can just shift that workload to the cloud, work through solving your problem, and then bring that workload back local so that you're not stuck in any kind of with that service degradation.
Yeah, I was surprised. We have a handful of developers at a client, and they're using basically their own computers and just logging into a VM that's actually running in the cloud.
Mm-hmm.
And they're able to, that's actually workable.
Yeah.
It used to be that.
Remember the days when it wasn't?
If you're, you type a line of text in and then watch for 5 minutes while it happens. You just have to have, it's got to be faster than you are.
Right.
And it sounds like we finally arrived at that, where that is usable. Mm-hmm. I don't know what the pricing and that stuff behind that is, to know like when you would bring that in versus local VMs if you have the hardware. But when I heard that, I was surprised.
Yeah, I mean, it's always a bit of a trade-off, but I think it's close to the point that cloud computing, or a cloud workstation, if you will, is almost to the point where it could be commoditized. I wouldn't be surprised. So yeah, I mean, that's also really cool, being able to deploy a full development environment. You get in, you do what you need to do, and you can shut it right off. Also, right. I know I've had late nights before, and there's nothing worse than your Visual Studio or whatever decides at that moment it's just not interested. And so you can just really jump in, get what you need to get done, bang out whatever needs to be done. And still, and in Azure particularly, you still can follow that proper CI/CD pipeline with the approvals, and you're not cheating the system or SSHing into a production box and, dragging and dropping files or what have you. So it's really cool. I do like some of the opportunities there, especially for prototyping as well.
Right.
So Chad, are we getting to the point where like all of our customers are kind of heading to the cloud, or what are the scenarios, I guess, that drives our customers to head that way versus having on-prem stuff?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know if all of them are moving, but boy, all of a sudden in the last several years, because that's the thing is AWS and cloud computing, it's not new, right? We've kind of been doing it for quite a while now, but just in the last couple of years, it seems like there's this mass move to the cloud. And I mean, I think there's just a few big reasons why most of them are. A lot of times it's cost. Like we said, it's this whole idea of it's like your utility bill where you pay for what you use. The other thing I think is like the whole reason that created AWS, they had a bunch of hardware that they wanted to repurpose because it was sitting there idle. Well, you don't have to have all this hardware that you paid for and then have to maintain. There's a huge cost savings there, but you have this kind of infinite scalability too, right? So that you can scale up on demand and then scale back down to save money when your demand drops. I think those are big reasons, to create a system that's as fault tolerant as one that you can create in the cloud on-prem. Think of what would be involved with that, right? Because I can make a multi-region app that's spread across the globe that's, not going to go down. Like,
right.
Even just locally within a zone, if I do multi-zone deployment, I'm spread across multiple data centers. Well, think of the investment there if you're trying to do that with an on-prem. So I think that's a big part of it, the availability, especially because when I say you have this ability to scale up or scale down, it's at every layer in the app. Right? So you can use a managed service API with elastic load balancers. So the load balancers also scale. It's not just the compute. It's not just Docker containers. It's all the way through the app. So that's a huge investment in hardware and people if you're going to try to do it on-prem. Almost insurmountable. It's really only these companies like like Amazon or Google and Microsoft that can kind of do that, right? So I think that's a big part of the reason why you can operate like those companies would with their hardware at a big, cost savings. So.
Yeah, I just wonder, what could GameStop have done better yesterday when it took me 25 to 30 minutes to simply check out and purchase my PS5 that I managed to get through just the luck of clicking and refreshing the page, and just making it through all of the error pages. I mean, it's just everything happened at once. It's like
you and a few thousand other people were trying to buy the same thing that same time.
Oh yeah, we were all refreshing the page and hitting that server, and I would love to see the dashboard that they were looking at when all this was happening.
Just read the logs of all the errors that came through on that day. That would just be fun.
Yeah, and I could just see them calling their cloud provider. They're like, "You're going to do what now at 1 o'clock on a weekday? You're going to drop this now." Yeah, and how much do you need? Okay. Yeah. The other thing I think that the cloud brings is these modular capabilities that you just can't build on your own. It's just not feasible to build the AI to scan through video and pull out text and those kind of features. Or what's the other thing they have, like facial recognition and translation engines, having multilingual capabilities when your business is scattered all over the planet. Having that where you can flip a switch and say, oh yeah, make a version of this in Portuguese for our people in Brazil. I just wanted to show off that I knew what language they spoke in Brazil.
Boy, I hope you got that right, Kyle.
I think I got that right.
Yep.
I don't know.
I'm not going to double check you right now, but
have you found that you've had to adapt your skill sets to kind of account for those things? Like, I don't need to know this piece anymore because I can just plug it into this other thing that's in the cloud. So I don't have to be an expert. I don't have to design and build those types of solutions anymore. How has that changed your roles and your jobs?
Well, I guess for me, I would say I had to expand my skill set quite a bit. Specifically, like for any provider, there's a lot of, you just need to know what's in the box, first of all, right? What are all these things in the drop-down list, all these services, what do they do? And I mean, it's hard to learn all of them, but there's definitely some core ones, and then you kind of branch out and learn new ones. So there's that part. And then for me, it was maybe development didn't change a whole lot, other than like if you're writing serverless functions or whatever, that's a little bit different approach. But definitely you have to learn more about infrastructure and networking, I think, to be really good at the cloud. You asked about advantages. I think another advantage is definitely security. I know some people worry about security in the cloud, but I think using a cloud provider helps you adhere to better security standards, and for part of it, they're kind of responsible for a big part of the security, which is kind of nice, right? Like,
whose servers are more up to date on patches, yours or the cloud providers?
Yes, that's a huge advantage, right?
Yeah, they have to be like bleeding edge to stay on top of things, to stay on top of all the attacks and things like that. I mean, they have way more on the line than the one tech support guy the company can afford.
Who sits in his chair with his hat and may or may not be up on all the latest attacks.
Yeah.
So what else besides security, Chad?
Well,
Bryan?
So yeah, I guess I mean, to kind of answer the rest of your question as far as skills, Kyle, like I said, I think it's more broadening your skill set and kind of understanding different alternatives that solve the same problem and knowing what to choose when, that kind of thing, right? Because there's also a lot of more what I would call like proprietary services that are maybe specific to the cloud provider, but there's maybe a third-party alternative that would be cloud agnostic. And so you kind of evaluate each problem for the customer and decide, well, what would be the best choice for them? So it's a lot of that. You feel like you have to become more broad than deep, maybe. Whereas if you're just, designing on-prem Java apps that run in a container, it's a lot more focused, I think. But yeah, I don't know that a lot has changed as far as how we write code or how, but how we design.
But the architecture changes.
The architecture changes, yeah.
Yeah, it's sort of on-the-fly specialization. Well, this year, since I have this project, I need to specialize in these things. And we'll see what the future brings. And I need to be aware of the possibilities and then be able to quickly look at those possibilities and try to gauge, does this have all the hooks and bells and whistles? Is this mature? Is it cost effective? I mean, there's a lot of moving parts to this stuff. Just because it's not running on your servers anymore, it's just kind of new problems, new things that you have to stay on top of. Bryan, with Azure, are you seeing kind of the same situation that Chad was just talking about with all the different?
Yes and no.
Stuff?
So the interesting thing is, first I'd say the biggest difference is, have you done IIS configs before? Because that's a skill I'm not particularly thrilled about having, but that's definitely the one nice thing about Azure is they take care of that kind of thing. But I would say, in all seriousness, it really is more. It is a different skill set, I think, on the Microsoft side, because you look 6 years back, 8 years back, you were kind of building for a single environment. Like 90% of the things you built were probably going to go on a machine running Windows 2012 that has IIS 10 if you're, or maybe 9, sitting behind a firewall that's remote. So you're kind of behind that kind of traditional multi-n tiered architecture with many different layers stacked on top of each other. So when something went wrong, it kind of created a little bit of a challenge in figuring out where is the issue. And you see that in the ecosystem, because I think like that Microsoft and the .NET has always had a lot of effort put into things like logging and reporting and monitoring basically right out of the box. And you see that in Azure, where everything you ever deploy has a logging, a monitoring, and a dashboard. It doesn't matter what it is, there's always a log and a monitor and a dashboard. That's kind of an interesting kind of cultural thing that's always been there. And I know like AWS and GCP have just a slightly different approach to the same concept, but it really follows that kind of like, I expect that if I have an Event Hub thing, I go into the Event Hub and look at that log, and that tells me what's going on. There's not necessarily this like curated list of here's what's going on in my environment. So, and then in addition, like I've worked with lots of people where dev environments were often running off of someone's machine, and there was kind of maybe a channel you'd go into. Usually it'd be like Jabber. You'd be like, hey, I need dev for 2 hours tomorrow afternoon to test. And the cloud environment, and that especially as you move into more of that hybrid or full cloud native development experience, you start to see that developer agility where you can just pull down what you're running and try it. And if your box has the horsepower, you can run it local, or you can point yourself to maybe your dev instances of those in the Azure environment, or you can spin off a new environment for yourself, do your testing, and then roll it back down. And often I'm starting to see people have more of their actual infrastructure in their CI/CD pipelines. Like the first time I ever saw it was really neat. We were running Kubernetes and able to just deploy the entirety of everything, like including Kubernetes, through an Azure pipeline. And that was just like that transformative. You're just like, that's the coolest thing ever. And coworker installed K3s and emulated the same thing, fully cloud agnostic, like nothing to do with Azure. You can run it on here, you can run it on there, and it all just works, at least until you try to get to like the Azure Blob Storage. But that whole ability to see something tip to tail is kind of, I won't say like completely new, but it's definitely more available. Like it feels achievable. I don't worry about setting up IIS 10 the way the web server has it set up, so that I can make sure all my paths are right. So when I deploy my MVC application, it actually works, and I don't break all the routing in the entire app, which never fun.
May have happened to you. It sounds like. So you guys made a couple of great points. I think that sort of the CI/CD pipelines have come a long way and have helped either the cloud have dragged them kicking and screaming into the modern world, or vice versa. They needed to come into the modern world in order to get to the cloud, because you can't really do necessarily one without the other, right? You can't just, there's no magic, spin me up a magic system and make it happen, right? You kind of have to plan and say, I'm going to have one of these and one of these and one of these, and I will configure it and I will set it up, and then I'll make a copy of it and we'll call that dev, and I'll make a copy of it and we'll call that test, that kind of thing, right? And so it's a lot easier in the cloud, but it's a lot more, I think, formalized and sort of done with a system set in mind, right? Where you can kind of get that pipeline for free or built in, instead of having to create some Jenkins or some other build server process that goes out and creates a dev server and spins it up and all of those kinds of things. The other comment that I have is, both of you have used the word cloud agnostic, which is kind of a funny term to think about, right? Because wasn't the cloud supposed to be the thing that made everything agnostic? And here we are talking about cloud agnostic rather than just cloud as a thing, right? I mean, we all drew that furry or classic cloud on the whiteboard, and that was, but it never had a flavor, right? This blue one represents Azure and this green one represents AWS. We never drew multiple clouds, right? Now we have to think about multiple flavors of cloud too, right? Which I think is interesting.
Peter, you make a good point with the CI/CD stuff being a lot, I wouldn't say free, but it's a lot closer to free with cloud, right?
Right.
Partly because of the thing Kyle mentioned about how they have all these services that are sort of modular and you can just plug them in. They all integrate very well with each other too.
Right.
Especially the ones that are like specific to the cloud provider, right? If you're not trying to be cloud agnostic, you can get there a lot easier with the CI/CD pipeline, the full end-to-end thing using those services between like the configuration management services they have, the built-in CI/CD tools, like you said, and infrastructure as code is another big one, right? So
right.
in those three things, you can just have this magic environment that you stand up and spin down just as quick. It's pretty awesome.
Well, and not just all the different moving pieces within the different cloud infrastructures, but the other specialized cloud-based applications that can fit. And what I've realized is it's integrate or die. Like if you can't plug into other stuff, if you can't play nice with the other kids, you're done. You're not going to survive. Because there's too many possibilities between all these different solutions. And, it's like more of these standards are kind of getting set in place and it just makes more sense. So you don't have to have all these individually specialized skill sets, OAuth is OAuth, the web APIs, things like that. There's differences between all of them, but it's all kind of playing in the same pond now. I don't know what I meant by all that. I just strung some words together.
A lot of standards bringing things together. And I agree. I think that you do need to plug in and be flexible. And I think that that's helping, right? As the cloud space becomes, more capable, everybody wants to take part in it and be a feature of this cloud service or that cloud service or all cloud services, right? You want to be cloud agnostic. So here's my cloud agnostic. I provide this feature for everybody, and I have to do a whole bunch of work behind the scenes to make it work with all the different services, but I'm agnostic because that's what I want to do, right?
And then, it's funny. This stuff just changes and happens like on its own so fast. Like one day I'm like, there's a few other apps we use. I'm like, what are these doing in my Office 365 app launcher? Like, we just got the subscription a month ago for this whiteboarding tool.
Yeah.
And now the link, and it's single sign-on with, it's doing authentication through, Microsoft 365. So it's using Azure for that, just automatically. It just works that way. All of a sudden, it's in my app launcher, and I'm like, why are they making my life so much easier? What are you doing here?
Yeah, I think they can't afford not to, right? I mean, there's too many big companies that wouldn't go with AWS if you couldn't integrate with their Office 365 for auth. Well, that's a non-starter for us, right? So they have to do that for sure.
Yeah.
So have you seen any, as you're working with these cloud products, have you seen any like possibilities where you're like, oh my gosh, now that this exists, customers could do X? This possibility exists now. Or things that you think are coming down the road. One of the things I think about is AI around content management, being able to have a system smart enough to look at your content and go, oh, this is your schema, this is your taxonomy, these are your keywords, this is how it all fits together. And then I can just pay attention to how you're using it, and this is what's most important. And now all of that information architecture work and content cleanup and all that kind of stuff just happens for you. I see that kind of situation coming. What are you guys seeing?
Yeah, I think the coolest thing I recently just saw is Microsoft just came out with two different things. One actually scans your data in your database for potential PCI compliance problems that you might have, and then actually goes a step further than just saying, here's all your problems, good luck. It actually will provide techniques, and there's different layers of how deep into this you want to go to encrypt and so on and so forth. Maybe you want to encrypt, copy the data, and then provide a kind of safe version of it. Hey, take all my data, but we still need a dev environment, so run a sanitization into the dev environment to replace all the emails with generic, username at emailaddress.com or something. Right. Which I thought was really cool. And even there's the other thing they added along with that is there's services that run and look for security issues that you might be inadvertently exposing yourself to. I think cloud does a fantastic job of providing you this kind of baseline, but sometimes things have different impact than what you expect, or maybe you're intending to be all behind this nice firewall and someone accidentally deploys a resource outside of the firewall. There's something that can look at it and be like, you don't ever do that. Is that kosher? Like, someone probably should take a look at that. And that goes into that ML, not only you can deploy the Microsoft machine learning platform and have all kinds of fun with it, but it's also running behind the scenes to help keep your environment in compliance. And if you're dealing with PCI data, I think that's a huge opportunity for just a weight off all the InfoSec people who are just, that's it's got to be the least enjoyable part of that job, is making sure, scanning through data. Is there anything coming in that's not supposed to be? What are the latest regulations? Well, now there's something that's kind of got your back, right?
It'd be nice to have a nice green checkbox that says, I am PCI compliant, and here's why. I use this service, done. and the provider who wants that reassurance says, oh, yes, we trust that service. Good enough.
Or something that pops up and says, if you click done or finish, you're gonna be out of compliance and screw up your environment and lose your job. Do you really want to do that?
No.
Are you sure? Okay, last warning.
Kyle, why are you hovering over that button?
This is the end. It's back to delivering pizza if you click this button. I'm serious.
Yeah.
So Chad, what's the cool new stuff in AWS that's out there right now?
Yeah, a lot of the same stuff Bryan mentioned. I think a lot of stuff around AI and machine learning is what I hear. It was kind of fun. We had, as part of this cloud provider evaluation that I was just part of with my current customer, we had people from each of the providers come in and kind of talk about their services. And they all kind of took a different approach. Google especially loved to talk about their AI and machine learning and how they could, revolutionize our business and show where there's deficiencies and like how we're doing our supply chain and things like that with machine learning. And so I thought that was really, really cool. Yeah, I guess, AWS specifically, they have a huge slide that they show you of here's all our tools that you can just run, and then your SOX and PCI and HIPAA compliant based on these scans, or even tools they have that do like code reviews, basically, right? They've got a service called Code Guru that will kind of find issues with your code, right? Like just code problems or security problems or whatever. So they've got a lot of tools around that. I think that's kind of the cool new thing. I still think it's just kind of revolutionary, the stuff that we've had for, over 12 years or whatever with the cloud, that I can have my app spread across the world and cached at multiple points using their CDN. Like, to me, that was truly revolutionary when I could do that and not have to be super rich. To be able to be just a guy, right? I'm just a guy. I just spin stuff up, and now it's running all over the world and cached at multiple locations across the globe. And so to me, those kind of things were really awesome. And the scalability of it all is very cool. But yeah, as far as the cool new things, I think most of that is around like the AI and machine learning. That's what everybody's excited about.
Tell the robots to take over the world, and then we will scale back a little bit.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, the robots take over the world. I actually had a customer say that to me when we set up like their blue-green deployment. I said, well, here's how this works now. And then if one of these becomes unhealthy, it pulls it out of the pool and then just spins up a new one. And he just looked at me and said, machines are taking over the world, healing themselves. And I said, well, yeah, you don't have to have somebody watching it. You'll get an alert that this happened. And
that's right. You don't have to wake up at 3 a.m. to find out that the site's gone down and then have to spin up a new one, right? It just happens.
Yeah. And that was cool. That was cool because that wasn't for like a giant company either, right? Like that would have been an unattainable goal for a company if they were trying to do it on-prem, right?
Yep.
So I thought that was pretty awesome.
That's an unattainable goal for most places these days, I think, even in on-prem, right? I mean, you have to do some crazy stuff to get to that point with all your services, right?
Right. Yeah. And here it was to set up their CI/CD blue-green thing, like I did it in an afternoon, and it was all infrastructure as code. So it was just totally repeatable. And I'm like, wow, that to me, that kind of stuff is really revolutionary to see how far we've come with that.
Yeah, look at something and go, if we had to do this 15 years ago, it would have been millions of dollars.
And not possible.
And not possible. Yeah.
But we could come close.
Yeah. We'd have to hire 50 people and spend $1 billion and it
lots of hardware, lots of places, lots of things. And then somebody would mess up the repeatability of it. And we'd have to do this special thing over in that server 3 that always has to be rebooted every 24 hours because it does.
Yeah. Well, I think of just the problems you're not having to deal with by not having to set up and configure your own infrastructure, like from the ground up, and making sure all your stuff plays well together, and just not knowing about that bug, and going down these rabbit holes, and, we're probably becoming more efficient and spending less time like running in circles trying to figure things out that aren't working.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
A lot less time.
So I like to think about the positives, the exciting things, and not think about Skynet and the robots taking over and AI. And
it's nice to have a good deployment.
Yeah.
And have it stay up.
Awesome. Well, Bryan and Chad, thanks for hanging out with us today.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah.
It's fun.
It's good to hear about all the stuff going on. Peter, any parting thoughts?
No, I think Skynet's far enough away. I don't have to worry about it.
Awesome. Well, that was the SDG podcast. If you want to get a hold of us, drop us an email at thepodcasters@solutiondesign.com. Until next time, say goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Goodbye. See ya.